is going on, y'all? It is the Caveman back at it again with another video. I finished up the record predictions for the NFC. Now I'm going to be doing the AFC. I really got to try and get these predictions done before the season sneaks up on me. But before I get into today's predictions, I want to preface one thing that I wish I prefaced when I first started the series. When I'm throwing up the record predictions on screen and you're seeing the wins and losses by game for every team in each division, I don't really want you to focus on the games individually. Record itself is what I want you to focus on the most. That's what I'm really trying to predict, and I just use the games and the schedule as a template. Like, of course, I take into consideration each and every game, and I try my best to predict them at this point in time, but that's just way too hard to do so far out. So long story short, just please try and focus on the actual record prediction and not the individual games. So let's kick things off at the bottom of the AFC North, where I have the Pittsburgh Steelers finishing with a record of 5-12. There's a lot of reasons why I believe this, but the biggest one being is the quarterback situation. Obviously, Big Ben is no longer there, and you'd like to imagine that it's going to be a better situation from the corpse of Big Ben that we witnessed last season. But at least Big Ben brought veteran leadership. He brought familiarity, right? You got Kenny Pickett, the young rookie that was just drafted at 20th overall in the 2022 NFL draft, and Mitch Trubisky, who's coming from the Bills in a new situation. I just don't foresee it being a slam dunk transition from Big Ben to Kenny Pickett / Mitch Trubisky. I don't think it's going to go as well as some people may hope. The offense, man, it's just so young, and I think it's going to really drag this team down. Offensive line, too, is extremely young. I just think this is an inexperienced team with a couple of quarterbacks that are not veteran leaders like Big Ben was, and I almost think that he kind of held the offense together in a certain way. Not to mention that defense isn't fantastic. I know they got Minka Fitzpatrick, TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, but they could not stop the run for their lives last year. Not sure if that's really going to be different. The way I see it, if the Steelers want to sniff a playoff spot or if they want to stay afloat above 500, they're going to need that defense to play out of their minds, because I don't think that offense is going to put up enough points to keep them in games against some of the teams in the AFC North and the conference as a whole. And that's the other big part of it too. The Steelers are playing in what I think is the second or third hardest division in all football, and the AFC conference talent is through the roof. I just don't see them hanging in there. So I do think they have some bright years ahead of them, as I mentioned. I just think they have to go through some growing pains. This will be a developmental step season, and I have them going 5-12, fourth in the AFC North. Moving upwards in the division, I am predicting the Cincinnati Bengals to finish third place in the AFC North at 8-9. I know I'm going to catch some shit for this. Every single chance I got last year, I doubted the Cincinnati Bengals, and every single chance they got to prove me wrong, they did. I promise you my bitterness for them is not playing into my record prediction here. I just don't think the Cincinnati Bengals are necessarily going to roll into this year with the same continued success. Granted, they did improve the areas of the football team in which they really needed to improve. Cough, offensive line, cough. They added former Cowboys offensive tackle Al Collins. They added former Buccaneers offensive guard Alex Kappa. Those are two humongous additions in comparison to what they were dealing with last year. And when you combine that improved offensive line with a skill position group that I would consider top 2 in the NFL, it'd be hard to imagine this record being what I have it being predicted. But a big part of the Cinderella run that the Bengals went on last year was their defense. They got hot at the perfect time. They weren't that fantastic throughout the season, but in the postseason, they heated up and they made countless game-saving plays, and their offense was often getting bailed out by the defensive side of the ball. I just don't see that defense carrying over that same momentum. Almost every single player on that defense played above the standard that we were expecting them to. The front seven really isn't great. It was carried on the back of Trey Hendrickson and DJ Reader. Trey Hendrickson at the time was thought to be an overpayment, but he certainly ended up paying off for them in the end. Is Trey Hendrickson going to be able to carry the weight of the Bengals pass rush unit on his back again? I don't think that's going to be able to happen. Their secondary isn't star-studded, but it's certainly deep, and all of those guys, like I said, played above expectations. Eli Apple, Von Bell, Chidobe Awuzie, all were spectacular. And of course, there's Mike Hilton, one of the better slot corners in the NFL, as well as Jesse Bates, definitely their best defensive back. Wasn't sure if he was going to return to the Bengals, but he ended up signing his franchise tag. Additions of Cam Taylor-Britt, and especially Daxton Hill, who's looked great throughout the preseason, is only going to help that relatively deep and well-rounded secondary. I just don't think they're going to continuously play like they did at the end of the year last season. Going back to the offense for a second, who's to say that Jamar Chase lights it up to the same extent that he did last year? He took the league by storm, but there are going to be adjustments made for the way that Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase were destroying defenses. Not saying that Jamar Chase is going to be bad or take a fall off, but I mean, they were dominant in some games to another level. Who's to say that that's going to be repeated as well? On top of it all, this division that they're in is going to be a lot tougher than it was last season. The Baltimore Ravens are no longer going to be shells of their former self. Baker Mayfield's no longer going to be able to hold back the Cleveland Browns despite Deshaun Watson not playing for 11 games. Jacoby Brissett's still going to be serviceable. So while being in the second or third best division in the NFL, they're also in the AFC as a whole, which is one of the most talented conferences that we've seen in football, probably ever. ever. So for those main reasons, I don't think everything's going to be peaches and petunias for the Cincinnati Bengals coming off of that Super Bowl high. I think there's just a lot of combining factors going against them, leading to the belief that the Cincinnati Bengals will finish third in the AFC North at 8-9. Moving on, coming in second of the AFC North, I have the most talked about franchise in all of the offseason being the Cleveland Browns at 9-8. I know most people will probably have the Browns and the Bengals switched in terms of their standing predictions for the AFC North, but I do think despite Deshaun not playing for 11 games of the season, they're still going to be relatively solid. I want to get a couple things straight before I hop into the Browns prediction. The first one being Deshaun Watson is a straight scumbag. The folks in charge of the Browns organization are nothing more than desperate low-life losers for bringing in Deshaun Watson, especially at the price they paid for him and how much money they gave him. But despite all of that, he's still on a football team. The Cleveland Browns are still going to be playing in 2022. And I do think they're going to be able to stay afloat. Jacoby Brissett is not this awful, unserviceable guy that's not going to be able to serve the role as the Browns quarterback. Let's remember, folks, this is one of the easiest jobs in all of football. As we know, the strong suit of the Cleveland Browns is their run game behind that great offensive line. And don't get me wrong, I do think that offensive line is still going to be one of the better units next year. But they suffered two massive losses at the center position. First, their first stringer went down, who I can't remember the name off the top of my head. And then when their first stringer went down, their second stringer stepped in, and then he ended up getting hurt. They got some shuffling around to do in there. I think that will have an effect, but nothing too impactful. The tipping point on the year for the Browns is definitely going to be Amari Cooper's health. If he's able to stay healthy, they'll probably be fine. If Amari Cooper gets hurt, they automatically have one of, if not the worst, receiving corps in the NFL. Their defense last year, despite the offense being a complete anchor, wasn't too bad. I mean, they were 13th in points against on the season, and I think they'll be even better with an offense that I think is going to produce more often. I mean, unlike the Bengals, the Browns have some pass rushers. They have a front seven that I view to be a lot better than the Bengals front seven, and then in pairing with that, I think the Browns have a pretty damn good secondary as well. With all of that being said, I think the Browns actually surpassed some people's expectations with Deshaun being out 11 games, and then when he returns, of course, they probably have one of the better rosters in the NFL, assuming he returns to form. All in all, I have the Browns going 9-8, second in the AFC North. 3 teams down, you got 1 remaining. The Baltimore Ravens, I am predicting to finish first in the AFC North at 12-5. I have very high expectations for a Ravens team that I think is going to come back with revenge, starting with Lamar Jackson, who barely played last season, had a lot of injuries, threw a ton of interceptions. Statistically, Lamar sucked ass, but when you watch some of the games last season, he certainly showed maturity as a passer, and when it came down to it, he was one of the biggest reasons why they were winning games. I mean, they were one of the top teams in the AFC up until the point he got hurt. And after Lamar got hurt, understandably, they did go on a large losing skid. They were still competing in most games that they were in. And Lamar was far from the only injury that this team suffered. They were probably the most injury-riddled team in all of football last year. They were down to like 4th-string secondary players. Their running back room was just a bunch of riddled veterans that were just looking for a 1-year deal to play for a little bit longer. This team was just so beat down, and they still finished 8-9. The Baltimore Ravens, ever since John Harbaugh got to the organization, have been a very fundamentally sound football team. They are never bad, no matter who's out there on the field. They certainly might struggle, but they are not going to roll over and die, and that's exactly what we saw last year. And now going into 2022, I fully expect this team to be coming back with a vengeance. The Baltimore Ravens are truthfully one of the best teams in the NFL, and I expect them to perform as such. 12-5 is where I have them standing at, and as a Bills fan, I really do not look forward to matching up with that team. I don't look forward to seeing them in the postseason potentially. I just really don't want anything to do with the Baltimore Ravens. So yeah, that will wrap up my AFC North predictions for the 2022 NFL season. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. As always, if you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, do all the fun stuff. If you want to hit the bell to be notified when I upload, I'd appreciate that. You want to go over to Twitter, follow me over there, I'd appreciate that as well. I have a TikTok down in my description that I think you should check out, and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace.